If you happen to hear a guttural noise in the microphone, it's your fault. Because that meal was spectacular. Someone mentioned that every food item that had been referenced this morning was on the table at some point during that fellowship meal. Thank you very much for your hospitality, for allowing myself and my wife to be here to spend this time with you. Thank you for who you are, because we have absolutely enjoyed every conversation, every interaction. We will leave here talking about the Center Grove congregation and what a blessing you all are. May the Lord continue to bless you in your efforts to share His will in this area and in all of the efforts that you support, be they India or wherever else they might be. Thank you for who you are and for everything that you do. We've been looking at the idea of the church and the home, and each study we've had so far looked at either the church or the home. This session we want to look at both. Now there's much to be said about the leadership in the church and the leadership in the home. Joshua is a biblical figure. He's not a New Testament figure. He's not an elder in the Lord's church. He's not a deacon. But the attributes of Joshua are needed by every elder and every deacon, and frankly by every preacher and every Christian. Joshua is the one that is perhaps most remembered in terms of his words for one very particular statement. Joshua 24:15, choose ye this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of the Amorites on the other side of the flood or the gods of the land that you now dwell, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. You make a choice, but I've already made a decision. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Let's take that thought, set it over here for just a moment. We're going to apply this to the home. That will be the primary area of focus. But we also want to apply this thought to how those who would be leaders in the church, especially in the assigned roles of a deacon or an elder, must first be proven leaders in the home before they are going to be able to serve in those designated offices within the church. And so the application that will be made regarding leading in the home is going to be absolutely necessary in terms of leading in the church. But we're not here preaching at elders and deacons. Oh, well, we are. There are elders and deacons here, and I'm preaching at you. But we're not only speaking to elders and deacons. In the home, wives and children need to appreciate the very leadership roles, requirements, and responsibilities that are going to be discussed. In the church, every deacon, every member, every preacher needs to appreciate the roles and responsibilities of elders. Every elder, every member, and every preacher needs to appreciate the roles and responsibilities of deacons. When it comes down to it, if we as individuals, whatever our roles in the home and in the church, would appreciate these attributes that we'll examine this afternoon, it would make each of us better equipped to lead in whatever capacity it is. And by the way, every Christian is a leader in some way. You think about what Paul would write to Titus in Titus chapter 2. He began by speaking about the older men, the older women, then the younger women and the younger men. Now you might ask, wait, which women were the older women and which ones were younger? You figure that out. I'm not giving an age. I'm not getting in trouble. As far as that goes, older men, older women, younger men. And with every one of them, there's an attribute of teaching or leading in some way. Every Christian is a leader in some capacity. As such, we want to appreciate the qualities that make up strong leadership. We want to encourage them. A wife ought to want to encourage these qualities in her husband. And if it's offensive to think of a husband having these qualities in a godly way, that's not a very good wife. And if it's bothersome for a Christian to think about elders or deacons exhibiting such qualities in a godly way, then that's not a very strong Christian. So, looking at ways of leading like Joshua, we're going to give ourselves 10 points. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, every point he's made lasted 20 minutes. We're going to be here forever. No, these will be short. 10 musts of leading like Joshua. We'll keep these rather simple. Number 1, Joshua's most famous statement, or most well remembered in our minds, is, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." First. With each one of these, we're going to give ourselves a key word, first. And then with each one, we'll give ourselves a tagline, another way to remember it. Well, first is make first things first. We understand what that means, first things first. It pertains to priorities. What is our priority? When it comes to leading in the home, and when it comes to leadership at all, do we appreciate what our priorities are supposed to be? Above all, do we prioritize relationships? This can be difficult. It can be difficult for every man, every husband. It can be particularly difficult for those with leadership roles in the church. But consider, if you will, that God's Word has given us a priority list, if you will, in regard to relationships. For instance, first and foremost, I am a Christian. My duty is to God. Luke 14:26, Jesus said, "If any man come after me and hate not father, mother, wife, children, brother, sister, his own self besides, he cannot be my disciple." The relationship with Jesus is to be top tier, number 1. No other relationship is to come between me and my relationship with God. In fact, that applies absolutely to the marriage relationship. Paul would put it this way in writing to the Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 7:15, he's dealing with Christians that are married to non-Christians. And he said, "If the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or sister is not under bondage in such situations." Now, 1 Corinthians 7:15 has been abused by some as though it takes the air out of Matthew 19:9. But Paul's point in 1 Corinthians 7:15, when he says a brother or sister is not under bondage, it's not that Christian is no longer bound to a marriage. The word translated bondage in 1 Corinthians 7:15 is never, 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 never applied to marriage. It's the word that pertains to slave labor. And God never depicted marriage as slavery. Matter of fact, anyone that looks at marriage as slavery is looking at it the wrong way. So often there's this phrase that gets used about the old ball and chain. Oh, sad. Marriage is not that kind of bondage. The kind of bondage in view in 1 Corinthians 7:15 is a situation where a spouse is non-believing and is about to leave the marriage based on the distinguishing characteristic of, "You're a Christian, I'm not. Unless you leave the Lord, I'm leaving you." Well, there is no relationship in life that is such close connection that in order to stay right with God, I have to leave God. None. Not even the marital relationship. Thus Paul says, "If the unbelieving depart, let him depart." You are not a slave to walk away from God in order to keep a person happy. Paul was not talking about the eligibility of that person to remarry. He was discussing the fact that you don't have to lose your soul to keep your spouse happy. Number 1 priority is my relationship with God. Number 2, spouse. Jesus would say it this way, "There are no more twain but one flesh. What God hath joined together, let not man put asunder." Matthew 19:6. When we're talking about leadership in the home, from the husband's perspective, his closest human relationship is going to be with his wife. We've discussed this in a bit more detail earlier in the week. For now, we want to make sure we have these priorities straight. No other person is to come between him and her. God is the top relationship, top priority, and then the relationship with her. First, I'm a Christian, then I'm a husband, then I'm a father. And yes, there are circumstances in life where a person has to make a distinction between those priorities. Husband, father. By the way, there are times when wives need to make that distinction as well. Wife, mother. What God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. That includes the rugrats. They're not to come between husband and wife. First I'm a Christian, then I'm a husband, then I'm a father, and then we come into that role of everything else. In my case, first and foremost, I'm a Christian, my relationship with God. Then I'm a husband, my relationship with her. Then I'm a father, my relationship with my boys. And then I'm a preacher. Gentlemen, whether that last one, that number 4, is preacher or logger or doctor or trucker, it's number 4. And even though that aspect of who I am is a means of serving the Lord, if I'm in the role of ministry, or even though it's my means of providing for my family, whatever the area of focus may be, our point is this. If I'm more defined by my occupation than my relationship with God, my relationship with my bride, and my relationship with that heritage of the Lord that He's given me, then I've gotten things backward. If we're going to lead, then we have to put first things first. And that is an important distinction for anyone to make that would be serving in the capacity of elder or deacon, because first things are still to be first. In prioritizing relationships, church, we have to be careful not to tear the homes of our leaders apart because we expect them to solve all of our problems. Leaders, be careful not to let us brethren put strains on your marriages that ought not have to be there. So when we talk about the idea of leading like a Joshua, let's put first things first, as Joshua did. As for me and my house, we shall serve the Lord. First and foremost, he had that top priority. We come to number 2. Our first key word was first, now family. Family. As for me and my house. Our phrase for this one will be, as goes the home. There's a statement, as goes the home, so goes the nation. It can also be said, as goes the home, so goes the church. There are ways that the church can strengthen the home. There are ways that the home can strengthen the church. And it is absolutely the case that the stronger the homes of the families that constitute a congregation, the stronger the congregation. Thank God for congregations that are building up homes. For congregations that are encouraging intergenerational relationships between the young people and the teens and the young adults and those that are middle-aged and those that are in the more seasoned areas of life. Instead of always keeping age groups so divided that there's no intergenerational connection. As goes the home, we want to keep the home strong. We want to encourage strong relationships between husbands and wives, between parents and children. It starts at home. We're going to put this general description with it: manage the house well. Now we're talking about roles of leadership. Management means the one that is taking the lead. Management means the one that is actually getting a broader view and looking at how all these things come together. It's interesting. A manager has to have a certain familiarity with all these different contributing areas that fall under his authority. That doesn't mean he has to be doing every one, but he has to know how they all work together. If we're going to lead in our homes, then it's going to be a matter of having a finger on the pulse of every aspect of it. As goes the home, so goes the church. So if we're going to manage our homes well, that means that there's a responsibility to be taken. There's a standard to be employed. That means there's also a critique sheet, so to speak, to use in terms of asking, are we managing well? One of the requirements for elders is that they are to rule their children in their own house as well. The same is said of deacons, 1 Timothy chapter 3. Manage the house well. Regarding elders, Paul would make the statement, if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Do we appreciate those that manage their homes and manage them well? Or do we turn them into punchlines? Do we look for those that, he's too overbearing. He doesn't let his children do this or his children do that, or he doesn't let them stay up late on Saturday night because he wants them to be up and moving on Sunday morning. Don't criticize the folks that are doing it the right way. Let's show an appreciation for those who have their priorities straight and who are managing their families based on their priorities. Yes, there are going to be areas of interest and activity where some families are perhaps better suited to be involved in these things, or they have more flexibility in this area, and other families may not be. Understood, that's okay. But at the same time, let's be really careful about painting a negative portrait of those who have the right priorities and are doing all that they can in order to manage their houses well. And in managing their houses well, they're preparing themselves to be able to lead in the Lord's church. So 1, first, putting first things first. 2, family, as goes the home. Let's go to number 3. Let's use the word final. We're going to use the word final because ultimately when a decision is made, he's the one that has to make the call. The one that's the leader in the home, the one that's been rendered authority. Wives, submit to your own husbands, Ephesians 5:22. Joshua made the final decision for his family when he said, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. Isn't it funny? Joshua didn't say, but as for me and my house. Hold on just a minute. Honey, is it okay if I say this? Do I have your permission? Okay, can I borrow your pants for just a minute? Joshua made the statement. He made the determination, the decision, the declaration, and it was going to require dedication on his part to maintain that. Now, as will be seen by the time we get finished with our study this afternoon, the dedication was there. And so was the outcome that he desired. Joshua made the final call. It's not always easy to be the one that is willing to make the final decision. It can be easy for a husband to second guess himself, and there have been so many that have been so second guessed by their brides that now they're not able to make decisions. They vacillate and they stall, and Joshua didn't have to see every aspect of the future to know what the right decision was. There are times that we may not have to see everything that lies ahead to know where to put the foot for the next step. It's going to require a strength and a maturity of God's Word, absolutely. But that being said, we see as big of a picture as we can see. But if we're going to lead, leadership requires decision making. Bear the burden of being the ultimate decision maker. Being willing to say, I've made that call. We're going to move forward. We're going to proceed. Let's connect that with this one. First, putting first things first, family, as goes the home, and then final, make the call. But sometimes the biggest challenge with making the call is fault. When we make the wrong call. We make a mistake. Joshua didn't make a mistake when he said, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. But Joshua was willing to make the declaration and let it be known, as for me first and my house. The buck stopped with him. That was the sign on Harry Truman's desk. The buck stops here. Do we take that role of leadership? The buck stops here means the ultimate responsibility for the decisions that have been made, the ultimate responsibility for the behavior of those within the home stops with me. The man that has always been second guessed, that has been undermined and derailed by an unsubmissive spouse, is very prone to being the man that can't take responsibility for anything because no decisions are his. And if he takes responsibility, then he's taking responsibility for everything, even those things that aren't his fault, because everything's his fault anyway. The one that is making the ultimate decisions, the one that is truly taking a role of leadership, is the one that is able to say, the buck stops here. And when something goes wrong, he'll own it. He'll say, that was a bad investment decision. Or, you know what, sweetheart, I made the wrong turn back there. I shouldn't have done that. Or maybe he's the one that will say, I didn't take the right approach with our son in trying to explain this, or with our daughter in trying to instill that. The buck stops with him. Because the buck stops with him and he's taking responsibility, then he's going to be the one that is willing to look at the way all of this comes together in managing the family, and he'll speak with his wife if it looks like there's something that needs to change. He's willing to change anything that he sees flawed on his part. He has to be willing to address things that need to change on hers as well. In the church, same's true for those that would lead in the capacity of elders, or those that would carry the delegated authority of deacons. If they're going to lead, and if in the area of their focus the buck stops with them, well, it's not fair to expect the buck to stop with those who didn't make the decisions because we didn't respect them enough to give them the decisions to make. So when we talk about 10 musts of godly leadership, it begins with first, making first things first. Family in terms of putting the priorities where they ought to be, and then as goes the home, so goes the church. And then final, making the call. Fault, accepting responsibility. By the way, loathe is the family where the one that is in a role of leadership actually tries to pass the buck. And the first man did that. When Adam sinned, and God said, have you eaten of the fruit that I told you not to eat of it? What was his reply? Genesis 3:12, the woman that you gave me. Yes, from the dawn of time, man has been rehearsing his ability to blame shift. But from the dawn of time, God has been instructing man to take responsibility. So, instead of trying to blame what goes wrong on the children or on her, he's going to take responsibility. There are going to be times that he'll take responsibility, not because he did it or not because he made the decision, but because he realizes, here's something that I didn't instill in them. Here's something that I didn't teach. Here's something that I taught wrongly. Or maybe here's something that I should have taught earlier. And in taking responsibility, it is going to hurt him. But it's also going to change him. And he'll determine within himself, that was a mistake. Because I can make mistakes. They happen. But I'm going to do everything I can not to make the same mistake twice. I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to benefit from it. Instead of being bitter, I'm going to become better. First, family. Final, fault. And even with Joshua, there's an event of failure. Failure is a reality. When we're willing to make the call and take the responsibility, there are going to be times that we have to face the fact that we didn't do it the right way, and now so much has fallen apart. Joshua felt that way. Joshua 7. Whereas in going up against Jericho, God had told them not to take of the accursed thing, that which was off limits and forbidden. Literally, that which was devoted to God. And Jericho was devoted to God because it was his trash heap. God essentially told them, don't steal my trash. And that's exactly what a man named Achan did. He took a Babylonian garment and gold from the city of Jericho. He hid it in his tent. And Joshua, in preparing for the next battle, based on the biblical record, there's nothing said of Joshua inquiring of God about the strategy for the battle. Joshua simply inquired of some of the scouts who said, just send a handful. Well, they lost over 30 men in that battle. They lost to the puny town of Ai. And Joshua falls on his knees and pleads before God. Well, if we've fallen before Ai, what are the rest of the nations going to say? God, why have you brought us to this point? Joshua 7, God actually tells Joshua, get up. The King James has it as get thee up. But get up. And then God explained to Joshua where the shortcoming was. Yes, the primary fault lay with Achan. And the punishment would go to Achan, the one who had troubled Israel. But Joshua had to go before God and petition and plead. and make changes. It's interesting. He'd been told only to send a regiment up against Ai. After Joshua 7, the sin is addressed in the camp. Achan is punished. Joshua chapter 8, God didn't tell Joshua just send a few hundred. God told Joshua to send the whole army, and He gave him a strategy for a primary insurgent that would draw their attention and for the locations of those that would be set up as an ambush. Instead of Joshua saying, "Oh no, we've lost a battle. Turn around, fellas, we're headed back to Egypt," he went to God. He faced the shortcoming, the faults, the flaws, and this failure, and he pressed forward. We have to be willing to fail. Husbands, you're going to mess up. Dads, you're going to have regrets. Elders and deacons, there are going to be moments that you wish you could go back in time and reverse them. We're going to fail. Everyone that followed Christ during His ministry failed at some point. Isn't it interesting that He didn't kick Peter to the curb on the first mistake, or the second, or the third, or the fourth, or the fifth, or the sixth? And then Peter is the one that's preaching that opening sermon on the day of Pentecost, right alongside the other apostles, but he's the one whose words are most recorded for us. Here's our point. God won't hesitate to use failures that are ready to try again. We might fail. Now, from the perspective of us that are being led, whether we're the children in the home or the wives or the members in the congregation, failure is an opportunity to watch leadership get better. Let's look at it that way. Proverbs 24:16, "A just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again." You can't keep a good man down. He'll pick himself up, he'll dust himself off, he'll carry with him the memory of the regret. But he'll let that memory shape him in a way that makes him better prepared for the next event. Better prepared to do it a better way, a wiser way, God's way. Wives, has he failed before? Then you give him the vote of confidence that says, "Hey, that didn't go the way we wanted, but I'm behind you." Children, has he messed up? You let him know that you believe in him. Church, have they tripped? Have there been things that they've missed? You let them know you're our shepherds and we need you. We love you. We admire you. Leaders, whether they're patting you on the back or not, God is calling. And something that He said to Joshua in Joshua chapter 1 still rings true, which brings us to our next thought. We've looked at the idea of first and family. We've looked at the idea of final and fault, failure, but also fear. We have to be willing to face them. There's a slogan held by a particular shoe company called "Just Do It." There's a lot of truth there. There are some things, there are times when we don't have all the details, but we know we have to move forward. We know we have to advance, even though we're not able to see all we wish we could see. Sometimes the problem is we want to put too much trust in our physical sight and our mental acuity. God didn't let Joshua make that mistake. As a matter of fact, Joshua 1 begins with the declaration that Moses, the servant of God, had died. Joshua is now leading. And God will tell Joshua, Joshua 1:6, "Be strong and of good courage. Fear not, neither be dismayed. I'm with thee. As a matter of fact, over the course of Joshua chapter 1, Joshua, any reservation and reticence that he holds, will see it addressed by God. Joshua, I'm with thee. Be strong and of good courage, because God's presence is with you. God's promise is before you. I'm leading you into the land. God's precepts are with you. You have my word. And God's people are behind you. 4 times, be strong and of good courage, is said in Joshua chapter 1. And the last time it's said by the people. Telling Joshua, you lead, we'll follow. When it comes to leading like Joshua, there are times we have to face fear. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the willingness to advance and act in spite of it. Ladies, can I let you in on a secret? Every time he has to make a decision, he deals with some level, some degree of fear, because he doesn't want to make a mistake. If you have been a good wife, he does not want to make a mistake in your sight and let you down. And if you've been a bad one, he doesn't want to make a mistake and have to hear about it. But either way, every time he has to make a decision, there's a part of him that's nervous and anxious. Until he knows he has enough of your confidence that even if it doesn't go well, you're behind him. Until he's come to trust in God enough that he's not just basing everything on his own knowledge and capacity, but he's applying some biblical ideas. God made a promise to Joshua that's still repeated to us today. Hebrews 13:5. Let your conversation be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have, for he has said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. That's exactly what God told Joshua. Be strong and of good courage. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to forsake you. I'm right here. Fear. Yes, frightening. Fear. It can be debilitating. Fear can be a reason for the right amount of caution that enables us to move forward without being overconfident. Fear can actually be a benefit. The prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, Proverbs 22:3. A prudent man sees trouble and knows when, hey, we don't need to walk there. Fear and caution can go hand in hand when applied properly. Now let's take this idea of fear and let's advance it one more idea. We've looked at 6 concepts so far. First, family. Final, fault. Failure, fear, formidable. God told Joshua, you be strong and of good courage. Might doesn't have to flex. There are a lot of folks in this world that thinks that strength has to be on display before it's strength. Yet, true strength is meek. True strength knows how to control itself. You want to see an image of strength under control? You look at a Clydesdale horse moving smoothly with a baby on its back. All that power, still behaving gently. Strength under control. Might doesn't have to flex. We can be formidable without being self-gratifying, self-glorifying, self-exalting. We can be confident without being arrogant. When God says be strong and of good courage, He instills confidence. But the confidence is not in me and my capacity. It's in Him. Proverbs 3, beginning in verse 5, trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not to thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge Him. He shall direct thy paths. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord, depart from evil. The exhortation given in Proverbs 3 is all the reason in the world to move in, to advance with confidence and humility all at the same time. Now, there are some folks that have confidence in self. As a matter of fact, you think about some things said in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 27, 1 and 2. Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. Do we know people that are confident in what they've not accomplished yet? You may have seen this when you were younger and playing ball. Before the ball game, the other team is talking about how they're going to wipe the court with you or run you up and down the field and acting like they've already won. Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. There are those that think they've accomplished something in life because of who they are. There are those that take achievement for granted, not because they've done anything, but because they like to see themselves as player one in any story, and I'm always the main character. Boast not thyself of tomorrow, thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. That same passage, Proverbs 27, is followed by, let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth, the stranger, and not thine own lips. Have you ever met someone that constantly had to have a shoulder looked at because he was all the time throwing it out of socket for patting his own back? He has to praise his own self all the time. There are some folks that are constantly trying to get praise from other people because they just need to hear it. Now, please understand, we need encouragement. And we need to be giving encouragement. There comes a point with some folks that it doesn't matter how much you give them, they want more, and they try to elevate themselves over everyone else to the point that giving them encouragement is actually detrimental to their well-being. That's not the kind of leader God wants in His house. It's not the kind of leadership He wants in our homes. If we're going to lead like Joshua, then we're the ones that will hear from God, be strong and of good courage. And while we will actually benefit from votes of confidence from others and from positive appraisals from others, that's not how we measure success. We measure success based on, have I done God's will? Have I followed His way? Have I done His plan? Have I taught my children in God's way? Have I instilled with them not only what's right and wrong in terms of the moral behaviors, but have I instilled in them the idea of how to treat people properly? Have I let them see a dad who grows? Have I let them see someone who's willing to admit when he's been wrong and admit it quickly and emphatically? Have I let them see the example of what every man ought to be? We can be confident without being arrogant. There are those that have confidence in self, and they're distasteful to be in their company. But then there's confidence in God. He that walketh uprightly walketh surely, Proverbs 10:9. In the fear of the Lord is strong confidence, Proverbs 14:26. Our confidence can be in God and be humble. If our confidence is in self, we won't be. 10 musts of godly leadership. When it comes to being formidable, it's not about who I am. It's about who my God is. So let's move to number 8. And let's look at the idea of fight. Fight? Well, we think about Joshua. He was willing to say, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He took a stand. Question, what do you think is going to happen in Joshua's house when his teenage son comes home and says, hey, Dad, I'm headed to the bar? Do you think Joshua's going to say, okay, son? Or is he going to take a stand? What's going to happen in Joshua's house when his daughter decides that she wants to live in a promiscuous way? Well, sweetheart, I love you too much to say no. Or is he going to take a stand? What's going to happen in Joshua's house when his wife decides that she wants to display herself and her body in immodest ways with her attire? What's going to happen in Joshua's house when any member of his family decides that they are going to flaunt sin and reject God? As for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. He's taken a stand, and he's taken the stand ahead of time. Same's true for us. There has to be a stand taken against the moral compromise that endeavors to attack our homes and endeavors to attack the church. But first and foremost, I have to take that stand for me. If I'm compromising, they're going to compromise further. If I'm being a hypocrite, they'll take it to whole new levels. We have to be willing to admit that we need to take a stand. We have to be willing to admit that we have to fight and that carnality is a threat to us. Some folks will say things like, well, that's not a temptation to me. Well, different temptations tend to be stronger for different people. But let there be no doubt. Temptation is called temptation because it's tempting. And you think about three characters in the Old Testament who are known for their superlative qualities. Take Samson. You stronger than Samson? Samson didn't have the strength to overcome carnality. He could lift a city gate and carry it for miles. But he couldn't overcome his weakness with women. Or you think about David. Would you dare say that you have more devotion than David? The one who was described as a man after God's own heart, a description of his leadership, but that leadership was a reflection of who he was. And yet, here's David in 2 Samuel 11 and 12, Bathsheba. You would have thought David was a pillar of strength and vigor. Yet he was still susceptible. Are you wiser than Solomon, who ultimately ended up with 700 wives and 300 concubines? And his many wives were his downfall. See 1 Kings 10 and 11. If we're not stronger than Samson, have more devotion than David, or wiser than Solomon, then we can't take for granted that we're not susceptible to sin. Whatever area of sin it is, we can't let our guard down. Have to be cautious. And in being cautious, that means we're going to put up certain preventatives. We're not going to put ourselves in a situation where we have flippantly, casually, and negligently allowed it to look like we are in questionable circumstances. We're not going to be going to lunch with other ladies from work, just he and she. We're not going to be developing friendships and having one-on-one interactions with the opposite sex in questionable circumstances. We're not going to engage in behaviors that rouse suspicion. We are going to do everything that we can, not only to be avoiding sin, but to be avoiding any realistic suspicion that it might be in our lives. We're going to be on guard. We're going to take a stand, and we're going to make that stand last. First, make first things first. Family. It's as goes the home. Final, make the call. Be willing to be the decision maker. Fault, the buck stops here, even if something went wrong. Failure, if at first you don't succeed, keep going. Fear, be willing to face them. Formidable, you can have the confidence and the strength to move in the face of fears and even over the face of other people's doubt. Fight. Take a stand against everything that threatens to tear the home apart. Number 9, fact. Joshua 1, 12 through 14. Joshua encourages the children of Israel to come with him and act like men. Paul, in writing to the Corinthians, would say, watch ye therefore, quit ye like men, be strong. 1 Corinthians 16. Fact is this: if I'm a husband, I'm a man. I don't have to be afraid of being a man, just like no lady needs to be afraid nor ashamed of being a woman. Regardless of what the world says about trying to make you feel bad about who you are or what you are, you were born as an individual With certain qualities, it might fit you into a category over here or a category over here, but that doesn't mean that men are more valuable than women and women are more valuable than men. And just because you might have masculinity doesn't mean it's toxic. Regardless of what the world tries to say, is there a reality of those who behaved in a chauvinistic way? Are there those who have taken manhood and turned it into something pathetic? But God never did that. And the godly don't do that. Masculinity. Masculinity is going to involve all the attributes of what being a man ought to be. That includes the way he's going to treat his wife and others. Masculinity would involve something that we would call chivalry. Chivalry. That's when he opens the doors for her. Chivalry, by the way, is going to be when he opens the door for others as well, not because he has any ulterior motive, but because it's respectful and chivalrous. You know what one of the great shames in the world today is? Half the time you hold the door open for a lady whose face you've never seen, and she's staring at you with apprehension as though you're some kind of a deviant, or as though you've got an interest in her. The shame is there are those who just make themselves feel important, convincing themselves that every guy has an interest in her. But the other side of that shame is there are women who have a reason to think that way because there have been so many men that acted that way. Chivalry is almost dead. The man of God can still practice it. And regardless of how people react to it, he can practice it in a way that is absolutely innocent and sincere. Masculinity tries to go beyond and show a kindness and a gentleness, but also exhibit a toughness when it needs to be there. Godly masculinity isn't toxic, and toxicity isn't godly masculinity. The one that thinks he needs to deride his wife or turn everything into a battle of the sexes. Oh yes, again, there are times that we can laugh about the distinctions between the genders. We can giggle about the tendencies of women compared to the tendencies of men and the things that make us so distinctive. And we can enjoy those in a very kind, gentle, proper way. But when we turn them into some sort of competition, those on either side of the gender aisle that endeavor to use their gender identity in order to look down at the opposite sex ought to be ashamed of themselves. Masculinity is no more toxic than femininity. But there's toxicity in both when they turn it into something that divides instead of something that can define and strengthen. In the Lord's church, the same can be said. So, fact, if we're talking about leadership, particularly leadership in the home, be a man and act like it. Leadership in the church, the same thing. Number 10. 10 musts to lead like Joshua. Finish. There have been many that were willing to say, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord on Sunday. As for me and my house, we've got ball games on Wednesday. As for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. And then 2 weeks later, as for me and my house, we're just tired this morning. As for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. But as for me and my house, we sure do enjoy imbibing in some alcohol or reveling in some indecency. Joshua finished. To the point that the one that declared to an entire nation, you make your own choice. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The people responded, we will serve the Lord. Joshua said, oh, you can't serve the Lord. He's not going to tolerate your unfaithfulness. They said, no, we will serve the Lord. And Joshua, in Joshua 24, reminded them of the promise that they had made and say, if you promise to serve the Lord, put away your idols, ultimately. Joshua 24:31. Joshua has died at a ripe old age. And he lived the very legacy that he set out to leave. The children of Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that overlived Joshua. Those who had seen the works of the Lord which he had done. Joshua lived well in order to die well. He left the example that would put those who followed him on the proper path. There was a man in the New Testament whose final pen strokes declared, I have fought a good faith. I fought a good fight. I've finished my course. I've kept the faith. 2 Timothy 4, Paul actually said, I'm already being offered. The time of my departure is at hand. He knew the time was drawing to a close. Paul could look back over his life. He had his share of regrets. But he could say, I fought a good fight. I finished this course. And I've kept the faith. What's left for you, Paul? Henceforth is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. For those of us who are led, let's encourage our leaders to lead that way. In a way that they will be able to say, henceforth is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. For those of us who are in the role of leadership, let's lead in such a way that when we see the end of the line, whether it comes quicker than we expected or later than we expected, we can say, looking back over the course of our lives, knowing that there are regrets, knowing that there have been faults, knowing that there have been failures, but also knowing that we've been able to be formidable because we trusted in the Lord and not in ourselves. We put up a fight because we stood with Him. We faced the fact that we were going to move forward like men of God and be able to say, I fought a good fight. Are you fighting a good fight in the way that you're bringing in your family? I finished my course. Are you running the right route? And I've kept the faith. 10 musts of godly leadership. These principles will impact every aspect of the home. They'll not only impact the leader, but those of us who know we're supposed to be led. And sometimes it's the case that we really didn't want to be led, right up until that leadership brought us to the point of realizing how wrong we've been. This afternoon, 10 musts of godly leadership. First, put first things first. Family. As goes the home, so goes the church. Final, the leader has to be willing to make the call. Support him in making that final decision. Fault. Face shortcomings. And if at first you don't succeed in facing failure, try again. Number 6, when we talk about fear, it doesn't have to debilitate us. When we talk about being formidable, we can do it with the right mindset. When we talk about fighting, we can take a stand. When we talk about facts, move forward as men of God. And ultimately, we want to finish. Now, maybe you've not even started. Maybe it's the case that you're someone here today who's never started on a walk with Christ. You never obeyed the gospel. As we studied during the morning worship hour, what it means to call on the name of the Lord. Receiving that gospel message of Christ that declares His death, His resurrection, and the fact that He left witnesses. Believing it to the point of being willing to say, I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and I want to repent. I don't want to live the way I've lived anymore. My heart's broken. My mind's changed. I want to be different. How do I put my past behind me? Are you ready to die? Buried with Him by baptism into death? Raised to walk in newness of life, Romans 6, 3 and 4. It might be the case this afternoon that you're ready to obey the gospel and become a Christian. It might be the case this afternoon that you're a Christian that needs to repent for some sin in your life. Maybe it's something that you've been struggling with it privately. No one else knows about it, but you're not able to overcome it. You need the prayers and the encouragement of the saints. Maybe it's something that you've been doing in the home that's undermined the leadership in the home, whether you're the leader or the one led. Maybe it's something you've done in the church. And you've not even stopped to think about how it's impacting the role of the shepherds as they serve in the capacity that God's given them. Brethren, there's no shame in repenting. The only shame is in carrying the sin.